Mike Florio, popular co-host of Pro Football Talk Live. He joins us on the program. Let me start with the poll question. The underdog, best chance to win in the AFC?
I think it's the Patriots. Bill Belichick, single elimination, all those playoff games he's coached over the years. And it has to be a record that the Bills and the Patriots, for two teams to get together 3 times in 40 days. They had 2 late regular season games. Patriots won in Buffalo on a cold and windy night. Now, it's not going to be as windy. And even if it is, I think the Bills have figured out they need to unleash Josh Allen. It's not going to be easy for the Patriots, but it's hard not to trust Bill Belichick. If you give me those 3 options and you say which one wins, and we know that home teams have been winning games like never before, I'd have to go with the Patriots.
All the votes are in for all the honors, Coach of the Year, MVP,
Yes.
all of that's been tabulated here. Who's your Coach of the Year?
Well, I don't have one of the votes. So we do our own awards. And at PFT, I consulted with my staff. And I'm not being sarcastic because I wasn't sure which way I was going to go with Coach of the Year, but they persuaded me that it should be Mike Vrabel. And when you consider that they set a record, in week 12, they set the record for the number of total players used.
Yeah.
They didn't have Derrick Henry, the best player on their team, for more than half of the season. And they still got the number 1 seed in a top-heavy AFC. You know, I was thinking Matt LaFleur until we really sat down and talked it through. And Rich Bisaccia, what he did was so special, but it's a tough year. But I think Vrabel by a nose over LaFleur.
Yeah, I was wondering about Belichick. It was like last year he did one of his best coaching jobs. This year I expected them to make the playoffs. But I don't know. How do you differentiate when you're the greatest coach of all time? It's like Chuck Noll, I don't think ever won Coach of the Year. You know, the great coaches or the guys who are really successful normally don't win Coach of the Year. Why is that?
Well, because the Coach of the Year is kind of loosely determined by how far you exceed the expectations that were loosely out there going into the season. So if there's a team that's just supposed to be complete and total crap and they make the playoffs, all of a sudden that coach is a viable candidate for Coach of the Year. The bar is always high for the Patriots, so it's very difficult for Bill Belichick to exceed that bar high enough that it stands out over somebody who takes a team from worst to first, like a Zach Taylor, who should get some consideration, or a Vrabel, who did something special without his best player. But, you know, Dan, we also do Executive of the Year. That's not one of the official Associated Press, NFL awards. Sporting News, for whatever reason, is still the officially recognized Executive of the Year. That's the one that people pay attention to. I don't know why. I don't even think they still make Sporting News, but that's another issue altogether. We made Belichick our Executive of the Year because it's always hand in hand. What Belichick does as an executive either makes it harder or easier for him as a coach. This year, what they did going all in, spending all that money when they had the cap space that they had carefully built in a year where other teams weren't as competitive because of the drop in the salary cap due to the pandemic. And they got Mac Jones when maybe the 49ers really did want him with the 3rd overall pick, and they ultimately didn't take him. And it just worked out well that they have the talent they need to be as competitive as they were. So he's Executive of the Year, not Coach of the Year, but Executive of the Year.
Who's worst Executive of the Year?
Well, I don't know. Dave Gettleman has already been fired. Although you know, the reality is, and I think one of the things we learn every year at this time, as the bad teams dump coaches and general managers and they make their owners available to speak to the media, you start to get an idea of why bad teams stay bad and why they can't get out of their own way. I got some strong feelings about the Giants, for example, and I think the Mara family is way too involved in the management of that team from a personnel standpoint. And they're so involved that they don't even realize how involved they are. But there's a reason this team has been to the playoffs once in the last decade. There's a reason this team has one playoff appearance, no playoff victory since their last Super Bowl win. It's stunning how far they've fallen. And I feel like they're in quicksand, and the harder they try to get out, the deeper they sink. And I think at this point, I got the vibe from the Mara press conference yesterday, I don't think they know what to do. Now, they're not going to admit that, but just I don't think they know what to do. And unless they're willing to completely step aside from the personnel side of the Giants, I don't know that a general manager who has real options should want to go step into that job.
Well, they fired Joe Judge, which they had to do. I was told that on Monday that if you don't fire Joe Judge, you're going to limit the number of candidates to become a general manager there. But I look at Stephen Ross in Miami. It doesn't feel like he knows what he's doing. You have the Bears, the McCaskey family. It doesn't feel like they know what they're doing right now. And
for different reasons. With Ross, this is very simple. And there's a sweet spot. I'm not big into owners meddling into what their team does, unless you're going to give yourself the title like Jerry Jones did 32 years ago, and 32 years later, he's the general manager of the team. But I think the owner needs to live and work in the facility, in the building, in the town where his team is. You need to have that presence every day. The owner's in the building, like Robert Kraft. And Robert Kraft isn't meddling with the Patriots, but his base of operations is Gillette Stadium. I think if you're going to buy an NFL team, you need to make that commitment that where the team does business, you do your business. You need to be there, because when Stephen Ross barnstorms in and he's watching a game in the luxury suite and he's got people from the front office whispering to him and the coach can't defend himself and there's any type of dysfunction in the organization when the boss isn't there, who's getting thrown under the bus? It's the guy who doesn't have a voice whispering into the boss's ear the one day a week that he happens to be in town. And with the Bears, it's a different issue altogether. But with Stephen Ross, he should either commit to that team completely, move to South Florida, show up every day, or just sell the team to someone who will.
He's Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk Live co-host with Chris Sims. The Jim Harbaugh situation, it seems like he's enjoying this because it felt like last year he was holding on for dear life, take a pay cut. Now all of a sudden, hey, you got blown out by Georgia, but so what? Now you got teams reportedly interested in him. Has anybody interviewed Jim Harbaugh yet in the NFL?
Well, those types of interviews can happen without anyone knowing. The reason that we see these reports over and over again this week that the Vikings requested permission to speak to this person, the Bears requested permission to speak to that person. If it's somebody who's currently employed by one of the other teams, there's a piece of paper that makes it to the league office that then gets leaked to reporters they have on the payroll or others that this interview is going to happen. If it's not somebody who's currently employed by another team, there's no obligation to let it be known to the league office that you're talking to these people. You keep your internal records. You need to be able to show that you did a proper search. But, somebody gave me the idea over the weekend that maybe Mark Davis has already quietly spoken to the likes of Jim Harbaugh, maybe a Jim Caldwell, maybe, others who are not connected to other teams. Mark Davis did not take advantage of the 2-week head start to speak to assistant coaches with other teams. He's focused, so he said, on the postseason, but there's a thought that he's already talked to some people, and Harbaugh could be talking off the grid to a lot of these teams. And it used to be that's how college coaches did it. It was the kiss of death to ever let anyone know you were talking to an NFL team because it was going to be used against you in recruiting. I remember when the 49ers hired Dennis Erickson in 2003. Nobody even knew Dennis Erickson was a candidate, and he shouldn't have been, but nobody even knew he was a candidate for the job. And that's how it used to be. But now it's a little more open. And I think Harbaugh is maybe at a minimum, back channel discussions about what he would be paid. And hey, do your thing. Leverage Michigan. You took a $4 million pay cut. This is your chance to make it back. Go make it back.
Antonio Brown is not going to play. I guess the team is not going to be able to pick him up. Is he going to need surgery on his ankle? So therefore, that would preclude him from joining another team?
Well, this is the old dog chasing its tail analysis with Antonio Brown, because we saw him play against the Jets. And one of the big arguments against the notion that he said he was injured, people saying, oh, he ran off the field fine. Oh, look at this. He was playing. So I think he could play at a level below 100%. He was on that podcast last week, and they never really drilled down on the question I would have. You're not 100%, but if the Chiefs would call you and you're 85%, and they'll take 85% Antonio Brown over 100% Byron Pringle, Demarcus Robinson, and Josh Gordon, would you do that? And, the fact that we haven't heard that surgery is scheduled, it makes me think that he's just kind of waiting just in case. And hey, look at it this way. If the Chiefs win this weekend and Tyreek Hill gets injured and he's done for the rest of the playoffs, and I don't want to be accused of jinxing anyone, but that could happen. He's got that heel that he was hobbling around with. If all of a sudden Tyreek Hill's gone and the Chiefs are still alive, how do you not at least consider giving Antonio Brown a call? So, I think the smart move for him is delay the surgery. And I think he does need surgery. But I think if he had to, just like he did that day at MetLife Stadium, shoot it up with Toradol, go out and play.
Are the Colts stuck at quarterback?
Well, they've given up a third-round pick and what will be a first-round pick for Carson Wentz. Now, contractually, could they have some flexibility? They didn't take the gigantic cap charge on because it was the Eagles that made the big upfront investment in Carson Wentz. I just think that they would be wise to consider all options. And when Frank Reich was asked the question earlier this week, when you have a true franchise quarterback and you're asked any question about what the status of your quarterback is, if they would ask Matt LaFleur about Aaron Rodgers' status or Bruce Arians about Tom Brady's status, you'd laugh at it. The fact that Carson Wentz, when his name come up, it wasn't laughed at by Frank Reich, that tells you they have to, because he was the thing that held their offense back this year.
Explain that TJ Watt is not the all-time single-season sack record holder.
Well, the dreaded aborted snap. He thought it was a sack early in the game against the Ravens. It would have given him 22 and a half, and he would have broken it later in the game. But because of the way that the play was scored, it was a snap that hit the rear end of the center, and it wasn't technically a sack, and they appealed to the Elias Sports Bureau, and the Elias Sports Bureau denied the appeal. So there isn't an extra sack. And there's a certain irony to all of that, because the play that Brett Favre ran, that's an aborted snap to me. When Strahan got 22 and a half.
I was just going to ask you, which one is more of a sack in your opinion?
Yeah, neither. And hey, TJ Watt did it in 15 games. So he's got that going for him. And this whole debate about 17 versus 16, and should we put an asterisk on these records? It really doesn't matter, because the season is now 17 games. The NFL exercised its prerogative to expand the season. So the records are going to reset. And then it's going to expand to 18, and they're going to reset again.
When do you think 18 rolls around?
2030 at the latest, but possibly sooner. Even though the current labor deal with the union doesn't expire until the early part of the next decade, they can do a new deal whenever they want. And I think once they fully appreciate how much money is going to flow from legalized gambling, and New York came online this week with mobile betting, and they've made a ton of money already. As more and more states come on board, the money keeps going up and up. How do you make more money if you're the NFL and the NFL Players Association? You increase inventory. You add another game. And then I think they're going to start adding teams. It's not going to be anytime soon, but I think as they understand how much money can be derived one game at a time, 1 week at a time, they're going to want more. They're going to want to give us more, so there's more stuff people can bet on.
I was thinking about this. I think you were on the plane. It might have been a red eye coming back from Denver, and we were seated next to somebody affiliated with the NFL who said, "Ask me any questions you want." And at the time, I wanted to know about adding an extra playoff team and if we would be adding a 17th game. Well, he said at the time, the person I'm talking to, we're going to be adding that extra playoff team. So that's 7 years ago. That Monday, I come in and I said, hey, got a reliable source. Mike, you were there with me, but I don't think you reported it. And I got put out there, and all of a sudden somebody said, the NFL said, no, that's not true. And I went, I'll be damned. I'm in trouble here. But it was the NFL who said, hey, ask me any question you want.
Well, I may have been asleep at that moment, or I would have reported it. So it was a long day.
Yes,
it was a long day and night and week in Denver. But they had wanted to expand the playoff field for a while. They'd wanted to expand the season for over a decade. The challenge was getting the union to agree to it. And it was difficult to get the Players Association to agree to a 17th game. But money talks, and that's what's eventually going to get the union to agree to 18. They'll come up with ways to make it safer, expand the rosters, but it's going to be more. It's going to be more. And, Dan, I don't know. Can they justify going to 16 playoff teams, half the league? Maybe they can go to 16 if they have 34 teams. Maybe that's the key. Yeah. But I just think it's a matter of time before there's no buys, there's 16 teams, and everybody plays this opening weekend with 8 games in standalone windows instead of 6.
I'll leave you with this. If the Cowboys lose this weekend,
If the Cowboys lose this weekend, I think what's going to happen is they're going to strike some sort of a deal with their offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, like they once had in place with Jason Garrett, to take over eventually for Mike McCarthy. And eventually will be whenever Jerry Jones decides it is. During the 2022 season, depends on how they do. After the 2022 season, during the next season. But I think they don't want to let Kellen Moore get away because other teams are going to be interested. They want to groom him to become Tom Landry. Jerry Jones tried to do it with Jason Garrett and maybe waited too long with Jason Garrett before giving up. I think they're going to try to do it again with Kellen Moore. So that's the balance here. I don't think McCarthy gets fired, but I think they're going to mobilize to make sure that they can transition from McCarthy to Kellen Moore the same way they transitioned from Wade Phillips to Jason Garrett.
I lied. I have one more. If Matthew Stafford doesn't play well this weekend.
Well, they're not stuck with him contractually like they were with Jared Goff, but I mean, think about this. A year ago, what a big deal it was. 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford. And someone explained it to me recently. You know what? When you look at Matthew Stafford playing, the trade actually was 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and Jared Goff for Jared Goff. Because how are they any better off than they were with Jared Goff, the way Matthew Stafford's played? 8 touchdown passes, 8 interceptions the last 4 games. I think if they go 1 and out, and that's it, and they lose on Monday night, Sean McVay will say all the right things, but we know from his time with Jared Goff, what he thinks, what he believes, and what he says are 2 different things. And at some point, we know that vibe. They're all in. They're always looking to get better. They're always looking for the bright, shiny object. I could see him fall out of love with Matthew Stafford as quickly as he fell out of love with Jared Goff.
I lied. I had one more. Is Ben Roethlisberger retiring or just retiring from the Steelers?
I think he's done. I think he's done, and he knows he's done.
Okay.
Although, who knows? Hey, you win a Super Bowl, not that they will, but you get rejuvenated. He can't play like he used to, and he finally realized he can't play like he used to. And if we would rank all 32 starting quarterbacks top to bottom, he'd be pretty damn close to the bottom right now. And that may feed into their narrative this weekend, and so be it if it does. But if you would go through quarterback by quarterback and prioritize one over the other, he would be very, very close to number 32.
Who would be beneath Ben Roethlisberger on that list?
Well, it's hard to say with the guys who just have 1 year. It's hard to say, like, you don't put a Trevor Lawrence down there, do you? But I mean, think about it. Who would you put? What starting quarterback? Think of one starting quarterback who wasn't a rookie this year that you would say
Sam Darnold.
Well, Darnold, but is he even a starter right now? Jimmy Garoppolo's down in that category as much as 49ers fans don't want to admit it. He can execute handoffs extremely well, and he did play well against the Rams with the game on the line. I'll give him that.
Jared Goff.
Jared Goff's down there. Even though he beat the Cardinals somehow and had 3 touchdown passes in that game. But, it's easy to say, top 10 quarterback. Once you start rattling off names, you get into the 20s pretty quickly. And there's some guys making a lot of money that are down in the 20s. And, some potential Hall of Famers that are creeping down toward 32. So I think Ben's sufficiently self-aware that it's over. And I think the way that it ended this year, storybook already. You don't want to disrupt that by starting a new story with another team.
Now I'm officially done with you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, bud.
Thank you.
That's
all right, see you, pal.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk Live, show that precedes ours on Peacock.